Hello there, this is Redjoy, and today we're going to do a big old review of every single class in Baldur's Gate Enhanced Edition in this relatively short and snappy format. Obviously you can tell with the image right now that I will be starting with fighters. Lately I've been playing the game on SES, and I've been doing hardcore mode with insane difficulty, but since I've had the chance to play these classes over and over again since the old days of Baldur's Gate 1 and 2. I've gotten to learn a little bit more about each class and each kit and why I like them and why I don't like them. So if you watch my kit ranking videos, you'll kind of know my general viewpoints of each class. This is a nice big one that has all of the classes and kits listed out together. This is not necessarily ranking them like one is better than the other. Each one is kind of based on a grading mechanism that I grade them independently. They correspond with the tiers from the kit ranking videos. So if you haven't seen those kit ranking videos, you should totally check them out. Basically, the tiers are about the same, right? And the fact that you have the lowest tier that's like the most challenging, then you have the kind of you're gonna have a fun time, and then the really great classes. I'm going to go one step further and give each of these classes a ranking 1 through 5. Classes and kits that are a 1 are the kind of bad side of challenging, and you really should avoid taking these classes unless you have a really good reason to play them. And kits and classes that are a 5 are the best and great tier, best of the great tier, so you should totally check out using them if you haven't yet. So two small things. First off, some of the rankings are going to be slightly different from since when I did the kit ranking videos. Some of your really great comments and other videos that I've watched and other playthroughs that I've done, I've gotten to kind of change my mind about which ones are really good and which ones maybe aren't so good compared to when I ranked them originally earlier this year. Second, there are different situations that make use of different kits, right? So in some situations, a kit or class that is a 4 or a 5 might not be the right class or kit that you need in a certain situation, whereas kits and classes that are 1s might be perfect for a certain situation. So the unique piece about this guide is that I'm going to try to dedicate only 1 or 2 sentences to each class. This is not going to be a big, long, drawn-out thing to go into every single situation where the Wizard Slayer or the Dark Moon Monk is amazing and this one certain strategy that you can use for those certain classes. This is just basically a quick snapshot and a quick grade for each class and kit. So again, my goal is to only do like 1 or 2 sentences and to get through this guide in less than 30 minutes. Let's see if I can do it. So with that, we're going to go straight down the line. First is the fighter. The fighter gets a 4. It's all weapons and armor are available. They have a very simple role in the party, and they're great for anyone, especially if you're just starting out. The Berserker gets a 5. They're basically a fighter with a very, very powerful activation with huge bonuses and huge immunities. They're one of the best warriors in the game. Contrary to that is the Wizard Slayer. The Wizard Slayer gets a 1. Basically, you lose all magic items except for weapons and armor, and that also can include potions in certain situations. So avoid this class unless you really know what you're doing. Next is the Kensai. The Kensai gets a 3. It's an all-offensive fighter, but very limited to kiting and to multi-classing. You can multi-class very well with it, but you're kind of stuck without the armor. Next is the Dwarven Defender. The Dwarven Defender gets a 4. They tend to be as tough as Barbarians with quite a few more physical resistances, but they do lack a little bit in mobility. Next is the Barbarian, which also gets a 4. They are slightly less tanky than Dwarven Defenders, but they do have a lot of mobility, and they do lose a little bit of their armor. Next is the Ranger. The Ranger gets a 2. It's a fighter with a few Druid spells, minus the damage and extra APR. That leaves it quite a bit limited compared to the fighter. Next is the Archer. The Archer gets a 4. It's the ranged combat master that scales very nicely throughout the entire game. Next is the Stalker. The Stalker gets a 3. It's a variant of a fighter thief that utilizes more combat skills than utility skills. Next is the Beastmaster, and guess what? This is getting a 1. Yes, you do have high HP, but you have very, very limited weapon selection and armor selection. Next is the Paladin. Paladin gets a 4. They're a little bit like a Ranger, except they have better ability pool, and they can they get access to really, really great stats. Next is the Cavalier, and Cavaliers will also get 4. They're immune to fear, charm, and poison. Just watch out for other effects and for ranged attacks, and you will do great. Another controversial choice is the Inquisitor, which I only give a 2. Unless you are fighting casters, you're pretty much stuck in the back shooting either a longbow or a crossbow, and using an occasional super-powered dispel magic. This is the Undead Hunter, and the Undead Hunter gets a 4. They're immune to hold and level drain, which is very nice. There's not much else, but there's not much that's really needed. Next is the Blackguard. It's an evil paladin who has more offensive abilities and immunities. I give them a 4 as well. Next is the Cleric. The Cleric also gets a 4. It's a basic divine spellcaster with all of the armor and certain weapons that are limited to them. They can also use helmets to protect their noggins. It allows them a lot of flexibility throughout the game. Now, grouping all of these, they're all going to get the same score, which is a 3. Basically, you're trading, you get a couple of extra little abilities that are kind of meh. Okay in certain situations, but very situational, and you're limited by your alignment. So take them if you want them, but you're not essentially needing them. Next is the Druid. The Druid gets a 5. You have very powerful shapeshifting, powerful magic that makes them immune to almost all damage later on in the game with a simple quick casting. Next is the Totemic Druid. Basically, the main Druid is great in the late game, where the Totemic Druid is pretty weak in the late game because they lose a lot of HLAs later on in the game. So they only get a 2. Next is the Shapeshifter. Shapeshifter gets a 4. They can clean out, in the werewolf form, they can clean out a lot of enemies with normal weapons in werewolf form. And they're very tough and very powerful. Next is the Avenger. The Avenger gets a 3. They get some extended shape-shifting options and extended spells, and it pretty much knows its role. It's going to hang out in the back with its lower constitution and strength. It's decent, but it's not amazing. The next is the Mage. The Mage gets a 4. It's a basic arcane spellcaster with flexibility of power and gameplay, especially in the late game. And yes, we are going to go through all of these specialist mages, starting with the Abjurer, which gets a 1. It's a mage without stone skin. Conjurer, it gets a 4. It's a mage that can use spells that can damage, buff, and control. Diviner, they get a 1. Its identify is nice, but that's all you get from diviners. Enchanter, this one breaks my heart because they get a 2. Great for the early game, but there are no enchantment spells past level 5. Next is the Illusionist. They get a 2. Mirror Image is great, but losing Skull Trap and Horde Wilting isn't. Next is the Invoker. Invoker gets a 4. They get a lot of great damage and control evocation spells that rely on saves all throughout the entire game, and even though they lose sleep at level 1, they can make up for it with other spells to control the battlefield. Next is the Necromancer. They get a 2. Skull Trap is awesome, but you're gonna lose Mirror Image and Simulacrum, which kind of sucks. Next is the Transmuter. Transmuter gets a 1. No protection spells, so enjoy trying to stop basilisks and enemy mages. Finally, there's the Wild Mage. Wild Mage gets a 3. They're potentially super powerful, but on no reload games, I would say they're a 2. If you're using saves and reloads, then they're a 4, so I split the difference. Next is the Thief. The Thief gets a 3. It's the utility class. They're masters of traps and stealth, essential for any party, but they are individually soft and squishy, and they have low APR. Next is the Assassin. The Assassin gets a 3. They're a master of stealth and backstabbing, but that's pretty much their one-trick pony. They do lose a lot of utility, so you're going to need to use another Thief, but getting 7 times the damage for a backstab at high levels is a nice bonus. Next is the Bounty Hunter, which gets a 4. Traps, traps, traps. The nice thing about the Bounty Hunters is that they don't lose nearly as much utility as the Assassin does, and they can control the battleground before a fight begins. Next is the Swashbuckler. Swashbuckler gets a 2. It's a combat thief who is squishy as a normal thief, but loses backstab damage. They might be good for dual classing, but they have little other purpose. Finally is the Shadowdancer, and guess what? They get a 5. Shadowdancers they use stealth as a utility and have great, powerful abilities. They are a fantastic thief, even though they lose traps. Totally take a run with one. Next is the Bard. The Bard gets a 3. It's a lore-rich, high charisma spellcaster with its limits in daily use, but they get high scaling abilities. For the Bards, the Blade gets a 4. They double down on fighting and tanking with spells like Mirror Image and Stone Skin, but they do lose a little bit of lore, so you have to get that trade-off. Next is the Jester. The Jester gets a 2. Their ability, their special song gets a bonus for enemies to save to avoid confusion, but at least they're able to cast spells at a nice high level. Next is the Skald. The Skald gets a 3. It does lose a little bit of pickpocketing abilities, but they get a better song until the HLA. I tend to like Blades a little bit better. Next is the Sorcerer. The Sorcerer gets a 4. They are a powerful spellcaster with both power and a broad choice while not relying on scrolls. The Dragon Disciple gets a 5. You're going to get a Sorcerer, an Arcane Caster with survivability that gets bonuses to AC, Constitution, HP, Fire Resistance, and gets a nice Breath attack, all for losing 1 casting of a spell a day. I will take that trade any day of the week. The next is the Monk with our only half ranking of a 2.5. They're very challenging to play, and they do lack a little bit of purpose. But if you can get through the entire game and be careful doing so, you're going to have a lot of fun punching your enemies into oblivion. However, the Sun Soul Monk gets a 1. The challenge of being a monk, they're alignment locked, and they're pretty much locked into using fire damage, which is easily resisted by their opponents. Not worth it. The next is the Dark Moon Monk, which gets a 2. Dark Moon Monk is a monk that can detect illusions, which is nice, and they can cast Mirror Image and Blindness once a day. That's also nice, but they do lose Stunning Fist, which is not nice. And finally, there's the Shaman. The Shaman's dance is very weak, they have no armor, they have limited spell selection, but they can use axes. Yay! They get a 1. Next is the Fighter Mage. The Fighter Mage gets a 4. They have very slow development, but they gain access to a wide range of power from the arcane magic for damage and defense, and you can beat the crap out of weakened foes with those fighter abilities. Next is the Fighter Cleric, which they get a 3. They have good divine spells and decent armor selection, but they are limited in their choice of weaponry. The next is the Fighter Thief, which also gets a 3. You're going to have a utility character with some combat capability. They're very good, but a little bit slow to develop since they lack damage and hardiness compared to a normal fighter. Next is a Fighter Mage Thief, and they get a 4 as well. They're even slower than a Fighter Mage, but they get access to early utility abilities to get early game XP and magic abilities that lets the combat be an option later on in the game. Next is a Mage Thief. The Mage Thief gets a 4. As long as you are avoiding solo combat, you'll have a great time with really great skills selections and powerful abilities that can go either into full area of effect combat or arcane protection. Next is the Cleric Mage. The Cleric Mage gets a 3. Anyone who's used Aerie before knows that you have a plethora of options because you get almost every spell in the game, but that's not always great because it locks you up in combat. That being said, they can use spells very nicely to give themselves tanking abilities, and they do need to get a lot of XP under their belt to get there. Next is the Fighter Druid, and they get a 4. They are a little bit somewhat lacking, and they're limited in the early game, but they can be devastatingly powerful in the late game, being able to be immune with HLAs and get a huge amount of damage with those fighter attacks per round. Next is the Fighter Mage Cleric, and they get a 3. All spells are available, and they get some combat skills, but you need to get 6,000 XP to get above 20 HP. It's great when you get rolling, but it's a very slow progression to get there. Not only that, but you're dealing with that Cleric limited pool of weapons. Next is the Cleric Ranger. The Cleric Ranger gets a 2. Sure, they can cast every divine spell in the game, but they lose access to bows, which are one of the Ranger's best weapons. The last of the multi-classes is the Cleric Thief. This actually gets a 3. I would have put it lower, but after taking TX a few times, I gotta say I'm actually a little bit impressed. Not enough to bump it up to a 4, but they make an excellent support character, but somewhat limited as a main character of your story. Now I'm going to go into the dual classing options. I'm averaging all of these among the various kit options, as if I were to do all the kit options, it would take me like an hour longer. So I'm going to just urge you guys to check out my other video on dual classing combos if you want some more information. The first is Fighter to Thief. Fighter to Thief gets a 4. This is how you combine the utility with the damage and survivability. When you combine helmets with high HP and high APR with the utility of a thief, you have a really great character. Next is the Fighter into Cleric, and this is also a 4. This is Animan, and he is worth it. You will too if you duel into him, and if you duel at the right time, you can double down on those spells that allow for you to boost your strength and your protections. Next is Fighter to Mage, and this is a 5. This consists of some of the finest options in Baldur's Gate Enhanced Edition. You'll get to be an Arcane Master with the high attacks per round and helmets to protect your noggin. Yes, I am including all of the kits here, maybe except for Wizard Slayer. Next is Fighter to Druid, and this is also a 5, similar to a Fighter to Cleric, with the unique Druid spells that are interestingly similar to arcane spells. They can become invincible and hit like a Mack truck. Next is a Thief to a Fighter. This only gets a 2. Shifting to become a fighter is weird. You lose a lot of HP and the higher level utility abilities. I suppose this can work for ranged characters, but honestly, I would pass on this. Next is Thief to Cleric, and this is a 4. This is trading utility from opening locks and traps to casting divine spells, and it's actually pretty interesting as long as you don't mind restricting yourselves to clubs, slings, and quarterstaffs. Next is the Thief to a Mage, and this is a 5. If you do this right, you can make a mage that can go through any dungeon without being touched. There is a reason why there are 2 of these characters in Baldur's Gate 2. Next is Cleric to Fighter, and this gets a 2. Sure, some divine spells can buff characters, but this combo doesn't get you much else unless you are willing to switch relatively late. Next is Cleric to Thief, and this gets a 3. You're trading the utility of divine spells to opening locks and disarming traps. It's an odd exchange, and I think there are better options. Next is Cleric to Mage, and this gets a 4. You get access to high-level arcane magic at the right time. Once the Cleric gets level 5 or 6 divine spells, this actually can be pretty interesting. Next is Cleric to Ranger, and this gets a 2. You need more XP than a fighter does, because Rangers have more XP requirements, and you don't get all that many Druid spells. Plus, you lose weapon availability, like bows, and after the downtime, so you actually end up being weaker than when you first start. Next is Ranger to Cleric, and this gets a 1. Doesn't get a good weapon selection. The kits don't really work for it, maybe except for the Stalker, but it absolutely needs to be a Ranger at level 13 to be effective, and that's just not worth it. Next is a Mage to a Fighter, and this gets a 2. Just like the Cleric to a Fighter, unless you're planning on having a Fighter with level 1, 2, or 3 spells with very low HP, I don't think this is going to be a very good choice at all. Next is a Mage to a Thief, and this gets a 3. It makes a little more sense than going from Mage to Fighter, since the HP is a little bit more comparable, but you're getting the ability to open locks and traps, and you lose out on other high-level mage spells. So I don't think that's a very good trade-off. Finally, last but not least, is the Mage to Cleric, and this actually gets a 3. It's the reverse of a Cleric to a Mage. The issue here is that the lower level Divine spells are more useful than lower level Arcane spells, but they do get helmets, so bonus for that. So please let me know if there are any classes or kits that I mentioned in my rush to get these all done. I will let you know in the comments below what I think of them and what grade I would give them. And hey, speaking of comments, leave one below. And if you like what I do, leave the video a like and subscribe to the channel. With that, take care and good luck. We're all counting on you.